From Jamie hitting Claire as punishment a few days after their wedding, to the Highlander getting brutally assaulted by Jack Randall in a torture chamber, here are Outlander's most controversial moments ever. Starting with the fact that no one could have imagined that a charming guy like Jamie Fraser would hit his own wife. This was in the beginning of Season 1, when Claire finally finds the Craigna Dune rocks that could transport her back to her previous life. She makes a run for it, but gets captured by Blackjack Randall in the middle of the journey. Thankfully, Jamie and his gang of Highlanders come to the rescue and safely get Claire back. A happy ending, right? Well, not exactly. When the couple makes it back to the house, Fraser's buddies think his wife needs to be taught a lesson for putting all of their lives in danger. So Jamie gives her a "I'm going to spank you" talk. Mrs. Fraser is obviously shocked, 'cause to her, hitting your wife is unacceptable. But the Highlander who thinks this act is completely normal says he has to do it. This is when a major fight starts. Mrs. Fraser tries her best to get away from her husband, but he eventually gets a hold of her, and even though we don't see the scene play out, we know Jamie ends up hitting her judging by Claire's screaming. To say this scene didn't age well with our 21st century audience would be a huge understatement. But the show's producers explained why this scene was necessary. You see, it wasn't about Jamie trying to feel more manly by hitting his wife, but it was more about following the customs that existed in his time, until Claire had to point out how problematic they were. And this isn't the only time Fraser has messed up big time when it comes to his relationship with his wife. Fast forward to when Mrs. Fraser makes it back to Jamie. After spending countless years apart, she finds out her husband is married to Leary, aka the woman who tried to get her burned on the stake. Boy, their Thanksgiving dinners would be nuts. But get this, the way the Sassenach finds out about this is crazy. When she and Jamie are having an intimate moment alone at the Lallybroch house, guess who barges into their room? 2 young girls, with the younger one being a fiery redhead calling Fraser daddy. And of course, they're followed by none other than their mother, Leary. After this, everything goes down exactly the way you'd imagine. Leary starts hurling some crazy insults at wife number 1, calling her a Sassenach witch, and claiming to be Jamie's wife. It's one thing for Fraser to have gotten married thinking his English wife will never come back, but marrying the very person who caused her so much harm. A classic douche move, buddy. The next day, though, Jamie tries to stop Claire from leaving Lallybroch, but just as they're having a heartfelt conversation, Leary shows up again, this time with a gun. She's ranting about how Fraser belongs to her and her only, and then bang. The Highlander takes a bullet to the shoulder because, well, this wouldn't be Outlander without Jamie getting injured every once in a while, right? Speaking of which, as ridiculous as this incident is, there's no doubt Fraser has experienced some of the most horrifying beatings in this show. One of the first ones being him getting flogged, only because Blackjack Randall wanted to prove a point. In an episode called The Garrison Commander, the evil English knight had a little chat with Claire, where he proudly talked about whipping Jamie once for trying to escape. And get this, Jack even sarcastically mentioned how he'd initially ordered a corporal to give Jamie 100 lashes. But when that didn't break him, Randall thought Fraser's bravery would set a bad example for future offenders, so he decided to take matters into his own hands, which meant grabbing the whip and giving the Highlander 100 more lashes. Can you imagine how horrifying that must have been? What's worse is that in a chilling flashback scene, we see his scarred back with some torn skin hanging from it. Yet, through all the pain, Jamie refused to shed a tear, or even plead for Randall to stop. And instead of having any ounce of empathy for his victim, the Englishman had the audacity to make a creepy remark, calling Fraser's back a bloody masterpiece that he created. Gosh, that's sure to send chills down anyone's spine. No wonder Blackjack Randall is labeled one of the most sadistic villains in this series. And along those lines, there's also the ruthless Gillis Duncan, who doesn't mind committing the most heinous acts to get what she wants. Sadly, on one occasion, though, young Ian ends up becoming one of her victims. On his way to secure the abandoned treasure for his uncle Jamie, the nephew gets kidnapped by the Bruja pirates. It's unclear why he's being held in the first place, But then the pieces fall into place when the pirates take him to the Bakra, who happens to be none other than Gillis. Slowly, things get weirder when she starts bathing in goat's blood and has this look on her face that screams bad news. We then see the middle-aged woman drug Jamie's nephew to get more information about Fraser. As if drugging an underage kid wasn't bad enough, she starts rubbing Ian's leg seductively while she sits very close to him, half naked. Sadly, Ian has no idea how to react and can't do anything to protect himself. This is when Gillis takes off her robe and the scene ends. Even though we don't see a graphic end to those events, it's clear she assaults the boy. As terrified as we are for poor Ian, though, many fans praised this scene for showing the abuse of a boy. Without sexualizing or glorifying the traumatic experience, it's still heartbreaking to see Ian trying to talk about this event later, as he tries to process what a permanent impact it had on him. In another instance involving Jamie's sister, we also get an insight into how incidents like these can affect the victims' families, like the time Randall and his group of redcoats barged into Jamie's home and attacked Jennifer. In Season 1 at Castle Leoch, Fraser was telling Claire what happened the last time he was at his house in Lallybroch. The redcoats were raiding his house when his sister screamed, and the Highlander rushed to the house to fight them off. But then the situation changed when Blackjack appeared and placed a gun to his head. As punishment, Jamie was then tied down and whipped. Seeing how this wasn't having much of an impact on him, though, Randall grabbed his sister and stripped her right in front of him and said she'd give him plenty of entertainment for the day. Gosh, this guy gives cruelty a whole new name. Despite the Highlander begging him to leave Jennifer alone, though, the heartless redcoat took her inside the house, leaving a helpless Jamie downstairs, tortured by the thought of bad things happening to his sister. It was a scene that completely horrified fans, as it highlighted how immoral Randall and the other soldiers could be. It wasn't until later that we find out Blackjack wasn't able to go through with the act, because he realized he wasn't into ladies. But still, this scene was engraved in Jamie's brain, who beat himself up for years because he wasn't able to protect his sister. And this was still one of the many experiences the Highlander had to suffer at the hands of Randall. The most painful and traumatizing one, though, which is also the worst scene in Outlander, was when he was physically and psychologically tortured by Blackjack. In the beginning, when Claire had managed to break into Wentworth Prison to save her husband, the redcoat saw an opportunity to use her as leverage after he threatened to kill her. The terms were that Jamie would willingly stay in the cell in exchange for his wife walking free. As inhumane as that is, Randall doesn't even let Claire let go at first, before hammering down Fraser's hand in front of her. After she leaves, though, not only does the Highlander get repeatedly tortured by the redcoat over a very stretched-out scene, the worst part comes when Blackjack assaults him after he's tied down. That one specific scene caused a lot of controversy because of the nudity. Many people argued that by stripping both of the men down, the show was glorifying and sexualizing a traumatizing experience. Even Sam Heughan spoke up about this in an interview and said that the scene had more nudity initially, until he asked the directors to take most of them down. According to Heughan, even filming a heavy scene like that was torture. So, from him getting brutally assaulted by Jack Randall in a torture chamber, to Jamie spanking Claire as punishment a few days after the wedding, these were Outlander's most controversial moments ever.